part where you can go.
Okay. I'm just wondering because I'm still seeing the
Yep, I like to
title page.
introduce it and then
Okay.
I fade it in.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm ready. Hello, good morning. This is Theresa Skorseth, and we're here again with Can We Talk? Robin Hensel's with me today. We got a lot of stuff to catch up on, a lot of national news, a lot of state news, some local news, and she's got a whole collection of things she wants to talk about. So let's start with the one that I know it's on everybody's mind these days, the Black Lives Matter protest in Minneapolis and the fallout from that.
Right. Well, I have an article here from MinPost titled, "In Wake of Police Shooting, a Split Among Minneapolis Council Members." And so you can look it up. That's what it looks like online. And I have put this also on my blog. I made a blog post about this, but I can't remember the title of the blog post. But if you go to on my blog, robinhensel.blogspot.com, there's a search button up in the right-hand corner. And if you put in some keywords up there, it should pull it up for you. If not, scroll down and look at, there's a slew of, I have over, I think it's like 1,000 and almost 50 posts now that I've made in the last year. So this article is about Michelle Gross and Dave Bixley or something like that, I think his name was, and another gal who spoke up at a city council meeting about what's happening with Black Lives Matter and the shooting of Jamal.
This would be the Minneapolis
City Council. And in just a minute, I'm gonna play the clip so that you can hear it, because the interview afterwards, this is filmed by a group in the cities called Unicorn Riot. And thank goodness for them, because they do an excellent job of live streaming all kinds of important events. So you can look that up online, Unicorn Riot, Minneapolis, and find all these clips to look or show somebody else if you want to. I'll just read a little bit of this. It says, "Tension over the shooting of Jamar Clark by a Minneapolis police officer spilled over into a meeting of the 13-member city council Friday," and this is dated 11/20/15, "spurred by a brief protest by longtime anti-police brutality activists. Although nothing directly related to Clark's shooting or to the community's response to it was on the council agenda, the Friday morning incident revealed an ongoing dispute that has been waged throughout the week via press conferences and social media, a disagreement between council members who believe they should be directly involved in protests and those who think such partisan participation is premature, even inappropriate. Staged by three members of Communities United Against Police Brutality, Friday morning's protest got underway just as the council regular business meeting was beginning. That's when Communities United, Michelle Gross, approached the podium and began speaking to the council about what she thinks is a lack of police accountability. "We're amending your agenda," Gross said. Council members and city staff seemed prepared for the protest, however. Council President Barbara Johnson immediately told Gross there was no public testimony taken at regular meetings. Read the rule and asked security guards who were there in greater numbers than usual to remove Gross. Two other protesters took to the podium in sequence and were also removed. "This is just another sign that the city is not ready to listen and not ready to take action on pressing matters," said Dave Bickling as he was being removed. The three were not arrested or cited. But I was.
I know. For people who were there on the day that Robin was escorted out of the Little Falls City Council meeting, this clip that she's going to show you is going to look kind of familiar in a really sad way.
Between the protester comments, council member Lisa Bender tried to intervene in Johnson's order to remove the protesters. Lisa Bender was one of the council members who actually joined up with the protesters and attended the protest. Lisa Bender, Cameron Gordon, and Alandra Cano, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, C-A-N-O. Those council people actually attended, and they've been criticized by other council people that what they did was inappropriate. How could that possibly be?
I know,
they were
getting
elected by
involved
the
in your
people.
community.
They wanted to see what's really going on the ground level. And they have a right to be part of a protest or movement just as any other citizen does.
I would say they have an obligation to stay current, maybe not participate, but be there to observe,
Right.
know what's going on in their
And
in their
speak with their
city.
people that elected
Yeah,
them, that they
absolutely.
represent, absolutely. So she spoke up, tried to intervene in Johnson's order to remove the protesters, moving to suspend the rule against public testimony. Because see, in Minneapolis, there's no public forum comment time. There is at some of the meetings that they have, like their different boards and committees, but not during their council meetings. They may change that. Hopefully they will. The move constituted a public change to Johnson and came just a day after Johnson had called out Bender and other council members for taking part in demonstrations at the 4th Precinct Police Station. At the end of this article, it says Bendo and Kano were both critical of the use of chemical irritants and devices Wednesday night that might have been paintball guns, but looked very real to demonstrators. So I'm gonna play this clip now so you can see and hear what was said, because I haven't seen this anywhere online except with this unicorn riot. Is your audio picking that up good enough, Chris? It's up as high as it goes. Should I move this microphone closer?
Council, we recognize that you have important business to conduct for the city council. You will be given that opportunity soon. But at this time, we are changing your agenda. As of right now, we are holding a listening session for members of the community to speak to our elected officials, as is our right under the First Amendment to redress our government about pressing matters of grave concern. My name is Michelle Gross. I am president of the Twin Cities-based organization Communities United Against Police Brutality. Our organization has been in existence for 15 years, and I have personally worked on the issue of police accountability for over 25 years. Responsibility for the death of DeMar Clark and the resulting turmoil in our community are the direct result of the city's failure to hold police accountable in a meaningful way. From the time I was awakened in the early mornings of Sunday, learning about the death of Mr. Clark from the Minneapolis Police, or at the hands of the Minneapolis Police, I have talked to hundreds of members of the community, including family members and many witnesses. Not only are they outraged that police would shoot a man in his head who was already subdued and on the ground, but you have gone further by bringing a SWAT team down on our community. I'm taking my picture, please. And my time.
This is, as you know, a time of emergency in our community.
This is a time of emergency in our community.
It is time to
And you
bring
don't
this
even
to the
want to hear
city
what the
council
city has to say.
because it is the actions
We will be
and
heard.
inactions
We
of the
will
city
be
council.
heard. You will be held accountable for what you have done to our community.
It is the actions and inactions of the city council that have brought us to this point.
Council rules to allow for public testimony.
There's a motion to suspend council rules for public testimony. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. That fails. Council rules do not permit public comments at council meetings. Mr. Giggins, I'm going to
There's a lot of rules against the actions of the police in our community. There are a lot of rules against the shooting of Jamar Clark, and there are rules against the conduct of the city and the police following that shooting. This is just another sign that the city is not ready to listen and not ready to take action on pressing matters.
It's time for police to be held accountable. Neither mechanism in place in Minneapolis, the Office of Police Conduct and Review, nor the Minneapolis Internal Affairs Unit has been effective in disciplining and or firing brutal cops. In fact, there is no early warning system in place for identifying troubled officers. The Committee for Professional Policing has a simple and fair way to handle, I'm taking my stuff.
anything was accomplished today because they keep too loud.
With no question, because we will be back. These are our city council members. They are elected by us. We have every right to address the city council, and we will be back.
What's your next step, or what's your next course of action?
We'll be back.
And at the next scheduled meeting?
Oh, we have many other plans. I'm not going to divulge everything that I know right now, but I will tell you this. I have spoken to many, many witnesses. I've been working on this since very early Sunday morning when I got a call saying that Mr. Clark had been killed. Though we knew that at that time he had not yet died. I've been out talking to members of the community, many witnesses, dozens of witnesses. And as bad as what they did to Mr. Clark, equally bad was how they have treated the witnesses in this case. These people have taken no action about the treatment of the witnesses. In the immediate aftermath of this incident, 30 to 40 squad cars showed up, and all white officers came piling out of those cars, pointing guns at people, spraying people with pepper spray, pointing tasers at people, stealing their cell phones, and telling them, you better not tell what you saw, or you're going to be next. This is illegal witness tampering. Illegal witness tampering. Why is there no investigation of this? Why is there no federal government involvement in that? Because they have made it so that this investigation, so-called, is going to be tainted because they have intimidated witnesses, and these people will not come forward.
Have you been at the protest? Would you consider yourself a member or supporter of Black Lives Matter Minneapolis?
I'm an activist. I've been an activist in this town for over 25 years, and I have been involved in police accountability issues for over 25 years. I have been by some of the protests, yes. I work for a living full-time. I am a volunteer doing this, but I do support efforts to secure justice for Jamar Clark, his family, and for all of the victims of police brutality in this town.
But your approach is different. You're going through the city. I guess what I wanted to say is that
all approaches are valid. All approaches are necessary. I'm not going to get into the hair splitting about who does what and who does this and whatever. There are many fronts that need to be taken on in this battle. Police brutality is a nearly intractable problem in this town, but we intend to end it.
What message were you trying to deliver to the city council that they were talking over? What was your main message to them?
Our message to them is that they are responsible for what has happened here, because they have failed to discipline police officers in any meaningful way in this community. We have the Office of Police Conduct Review, which is a supposed civilian oversight body, though it is actually completely populated by police officers. Over 1,000 complaints in the last 2.5 years, and only one has resulted in being sustained and disciplined. Only one. That's a 0.1% sustain rate. The average sustain rate for civilian review authorities across the country is 3 to 7%. It is ridiculous to have a sustain rate of 0.1%. They are allowing police officers to get away, in this case, literally with murder. And we will not tolerate it.
Michelle, on Wednesday you made the announcement asking everyone to come. Are you disappointed that more people didn't show up today?
It's a weekday. It's a work day. I'm not disappointed whatsoever. I think we made our point here today, and we will be back and continue to make our points. We are not going to back down. We never have backed down, and the community needs us to stand up.
And there are more people with us in there.
Yeah, some of them just didn't get thrown out. There's a bunch of folks that
Other people came.
Will there be more of that interruption then?
I cannot say.
This is some of the statistics we were referring to about the lack of discipline. I was going to talk about this if I had a chance to talk.
Yes,
Recently, there was a shocking report in Chicago that 97% of complaints did not lead to discipline. Here it is 99.9% that do not lead to discipline. 1 out of 1,000. So we know that the police department will not discipline its own. That's what I was going to talk about. This is what leads to situations like this, and it's what leads to the everyday situations on the north side and throughout the city where the police act with total impunity. The police spokesperson, Elder, said, well, if you have problems with what happened after the shooting, with the witness intimidation, with the things that are going on at the 4th Precinct, well, file a complaint with the OPCR or the Internal Affairs Unit. I mean, that's a joke, and it's a sick joke, because he knows, and we know, and the city council knows, we put them on notice over a year ago, that there is no discipline coming from those bodies. These are people who are going, they don't expect to get anything for themselves. They file complaints. Almost invariably they say, I just want to make sure this never, ever happens again. And they are totally frustrated when they do this. We have got to have a strong, independent civilian review. If we did, we could handle situations like this internally in Minneapolis. We wouldn't have to go running off to the feds for an independent investigation. But we don't have that here. And that's so much of what's going on here. That's why there's so little trust in police in the community. So we're going to call them out on this. They've known this for over a year. There's many other suggestions we made of things that small and large could have prevented this. And if they would do them now, they could prevent it in the future.
The fact that they won't even hear what we're saying, that they don't even want to hear from the community that they work for, that we pay them. They don't want to hear from the community. This is atrocious. This is outrageous. You know, they know what's going on just a mile up the road. They know what is happening near here. They understand, but they don't want to hear it. And that is really an outrage, because there are things that this city council could do today to meaningfully take on police brutality and hold police accountable, and they flat refuse to do it.
What are some of the things they could do today?
There are many things. For one thing, we could have a real civilian review. For another thing, we could require police officers to carry their own professional liability insurance. For another thing, they could keep better duty logs so you know who's at the scene of crimes. They could release the videotapes today. They could listen to the community. They could take on a number of ideas. We presented them with a list of 31 ideas of things they could do right now to improve the climate in this city. Right now, to improve relationships between the police and the community. They have taken a few of those things up, but they haven't done most of them. Little things, like make sure the police officer's badge is readable. Make sure that, again, we know who's on the scene, you know, of different incidents, so that there's clear duty rosters. Make sure that people have understand their rights in interacting with police. There's many things that that these city council members could do, and they have not chosen to do any of them.
One of them they could do is take an interest in the union contract.
That's right.
For 3 years, the city council, the mayor, the police chief all complain, we can't do anything. The union is too powerful. The contract won't allow this, et cetera, et cetera. And every 3 years, the union contract comes up for review, and they are negotiating that contract right now. And to our knowledge, the city is doing nothing to change the aspects of that contract that will allow them to get some control over their own employees. It's shameful. No other contract is like that, and yet they are going to negotiate nothing. It's going to pass on the consent agenda sometime in this next year. Bam, bam, there it goes. And for the next 3 years, they're going to complain, oh, the union is too powerful. No other city employee has a contract like this union contract. But this is just ignored. It's one of the many things they ignore in here. City council says, oh, well, the police is the mayor's responsibility. But the city council has policy implications, they have budget implications, they approve the appointment of the chief, and they approve that union contract. They could have done things years ago, things that we have made explicit, things that we have provided them research regarding, and they sit there, and this is what happens as a result. So we will be back, yes.
Are you saying the union contract led to Jamar Clark's death? Like that somehow...
It's one of the aspects.
It
Yes,
surely
definitely
contributed.
is.
It surely contributed
Right.
to his death. And furthermore, it contributed to a lack of transparency in the aftermath of his death, because as a result of that contract, those police officers didn't have to talk for 2 whole days, 48 hours. They did not have to tell. That gave them plenty of time to collude on what their story is going to be, and to view videotapes and things like that. Because I'm going to tell you something. They stole cell phones from many people up on the north side after this incident, so they have plenty of videotape. They're holding it for themselves for their own purposes. And it gives them plenty of time to come up with bogus explanations. And in the absence of any truth, they are coming up with bogus explanations. Bob Kroll, who was never on the scene, and who, by the way, is a Minneapolis employee, is off running his mouth about making up stories about what happened in this incident. Many of the witnesses I spoke to said that, all of the witnesses I spoke to said that Jamar Clark was on the ground, he was subdued at the time that he was shot, that he had called the ambulance because his girlfriend had been attacked by another person and was injured, and the police came, threw him to the ground, pinned him down, and shot him.
If the video does suggest something else, a different narrative, that, he wasn't handcuffed or wasn't restrained, would that change your opinion on any of this?
Well, First of all, I don't believe it will change the narrative. I need to correct that right out of the gate, because the community's narrative has been absolutely consistent. I have talked to, again, more than 24 witnesses, and the community narrative has been remarkably consistent. It's just the police department's narrative that has changed over time to try to, somehow justify the unjustifiable. I do not believe it. It's changed many ways. Now they've got concocted some crazy story about he was going for the officer's gun. I don't know how you do that when you're subdued and on the ground with a police officer with his knee in your chest. I don't know how that's even possible. So this, they're going to try to spin this any way they can, knowing that they have all of the cards, they have all of the information, they hold all of the video, and they're going to try to let this thing ride out until sometime in the distant future we will finally get access to the truth. And that is what if we ever do, and that's how they use this. When they control all the data, they can control the narrative, and we are not going to allow that this time.
You've been advocating for this, for police accountability for many, many years. What is it like now that this is gaining so much attention, and especially surrounding the group Black Lives Matter?
Well, I have to say that I do feel hopeful, and I've always felt hopeful, because you can't do this work even when you have not a lot of victories, frankly. You have to feel hopeful that you can affect change. And I think that we are in a period of time now that I frankly thought I would never see in my lifetime, of people's true recognition of what is happening in the community. A lot of that's fueled by videotapes. People are standing up and taping the police, and we encourage people to document police conduct every chance they get. So we now have a better way to actually produce our own evidence. And I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that even with this disgusting display of pushing community members out of a community meeting, and I must add, an open meeting by law, even with that disgusting display of trying to limit our First Amendment rights, I am yet hopeful that we will be able to affect change in this community that will bring about justice.
There was a rumor on the Minneapolis discussion list that the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension erased images from some of the cell phones that they confiscated, and they threatened the people with 7 years in prison if they told about it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I would also ask you to investigate the 3 Molotov cocktails that were supposedly thrown at the police. Was anybody injured? Does anybody know about that?
There's no Molotov cocktails that were thrown at the police.
A lot of made-up stories there.
A lot of made-up stories.
And the thing is, the city says, it's an ongoing investigation. We can't say anything. And yet they concoct their own story. They put it out to the media. They tell you he wasn't handcuffed. But when other people say he was, they say, that's an ongoing investigation. We can't release any information. Then they say, that he was, fighting the officer. But we can't release any information. The city is happy to release information when it's their story. This is a nonsense thing when they say, we can't say anything during an ongoing investigation.
And it's worse than nonsense. It's tainting the investigation itself.
Yes, it is.
It is absolutely tainting the investigation. And as I said before, I spoke to 2 witnesses night before last who stated that the police held guns to their heads, took their cell phones, and told them, you had better not say what you saw, or you're going to be as dead as that kid over there. I talked to 2 witnesses who told me that. They are deathly afraid to come forward. They are deathly afraid. I've been in contact with the FBI multiple times to try to arrange an opportunity for these people to be able to speak to people outside of the BCA, outside of the Minneapolis Police Department, and we are making those arrangements. But these people are deathly afraid to come forward. I don't know that they will come forward.
What was the name of the 3rd protester who was removed? There was you.
That was Jan
NYE.
Has there been...
Jan J.
My name is Michelle Gross, and I'm president of Communities United Against Police Brutality.
Okay.
Well, I had a question really quick. That's cool. Has there been instances of police taking retribution against communities? I know I've spent a lot of time there, and that's been a big...
Absolutely. We've seen it many times. I've worked on cases where literally people came down to make a complaint to Internal Affairs, and the same officers that beat them up followed them home and beat them up again. I have worked on cases like that. We have many incidents where police drive through people's backyards and shine lights in their window, call them up, say threatening things to them. All of this is not unusual. It is actually quite the standard operating procedure for Minneapolis police. So yes, there has been retribution. So people do take it seriously because they know they know that their lives will change. They know that they may not survive if they come forward, and that's why it's frightening for people. This is a federal crime. Witness tampering is a federal crime. They have to, the federal government has to get involved in this, and they have to take over this investigation. The BCA is not capable of it. The community doesn't trust the BCA, and for every very good reason. The federal government needs to do a criminal investigation of this matter.
And what's the BCA really quick?
The BCA is essentially the state version of the FBI. It's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, but because they have a long history of doing things that harm the community does not trust the BCA in any way whatsoever. They should never have been put in charge of this investigation. This should have been a federal investigation from the start.
And it needed to start right at the beginning. The start of every investigation is the police on the scene, and that's where things started to go wrong right there. There is much more to investigate than just the shooting itself, but the aftermath. But we can have a so-called independent investigation, and I'm glad the feds are being called in. But they can never do a truly independent investigation because they are dependent upon the information collected by the police at the scene from witnesses, and they are dependent upon the information that was not collected and is forever lost. There are already errors in this investigation that cannot possibly be corrected. And that means that we will never get the investigation we should have of this. And it's because of the actions of the Minneapolis police, overseen by the city council, who doesn't seem to care.
Two-tier system carved out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A portion of the city. So I appreciate that.
Wow.
Well, I wanted the people to hear that because some of our listeners may not have access to the computer and be able to hear that interview that was taped by Unicorn Riot. And I'm, like I said before, I'm thankful for Unicorn Riot because they go into situations that some reporters haven't been able to get close to or don't care to go and report on. And the public needs to know this stuff.
Absolutely. Thank God for the activists. I'm watching this these three people being interviewed, or two people essentially, and I'm thinking they're old like us.
Right.
It seems to be that it's just ghosts from the 60s who are still standing in the front line saying this is not okay. Hell no, we won't go.
Except that the Black Lives Matter movement, and I stand in solidarity with them,
absolutely right.
led by some young people, brilliant young people, and one of the gals involved, of course, is Nakima Levy-Pounds, professor of civil rights and justice, I believe, at St. Thomas University. She herself is under 40, and the group that she's involved with, there are numbers and numbers of young people, and they're acting and doing the right thing. And I was just listening to a clip this morning of a pastor who was in amongst them and said that he took heart because there were so many good young people with a good conscience and were doing the right thing, and he was encouraged by that in the North Minneapolis area. So keep following that story, folks.
Yes, it's got more intrigue and more elements of really explosive secrecy than Ferguson.
And now 5 protesters were shot, black protesters shot as well. I mean, it's dangerous out there when you take a stand for something.
It is. It's dangerous.
Now I'm going to change the subject totally here to something that's been troubling me for more than a week now. And this involves KLTF radio station and their call-in show called Up Front, which runs from 9 in the morning until 10, Mondays through Thursdays.
What were those call letters again?
KLTF radio.
Is it KTLF?
KTLF, is that it?
I don't know. I'm just thinking it would be because LF would be for Little Falls.
No, it's actually KLTF.
Okay.
I made the same mistake you did, but it's KLTF.
Sorry.
Okay, so on the 17th of November, I called in because that was the morning after I had attended a public hearing it was the public forum comment time at City Hall, and Lois Machi, who is passionate about the demise of Hurley Hall, spoke up, and you were there at that meeting.
There, yeah. Mhm.
And she came to the podium after two other people came to the podium and assumed that the podium microphone was on, like this one is on, but it was not. And I have said for quite a while that they should have the microphone on the podium, because the people that are in council, if the speaker is soft-spoken, they can't hear them, but certainly the audience members cannot hear them because they have their backs sort of semi-turned to them because the podium is at an angle. And people in the audience, you many times, and other older people, or people just in general, if you got a soft-spoken person at the microphone that should be on, you can't hear them.
I know, why bring people to the podium? Why tell them you have to go, state your name and address, and then you can say what you want to say if the microphone isn't even on? In fact, it wasn't plugged in. So we got to watch some city employees, tipping the podium over so that they could look at the wiring underneath, and it was, how long has this been going on? Apparently it's an ongoing issue.
Well, they don't, see, here, this is my take on it. May or may not be the truth, but this is what I feel is the truth. The city council doesn't want work sessions heard at all. That's why when they were asked by this station manager here if they could be recorded and Chris could put that on, they said no, city council doesn't want that on. So that's why my filming of the work sessions is so important, because it's the only way that people can really hear what's going on, because most of the important stuff is discussed behind the scenes, so to speak, in an open meeting called the work session, that they would never have access to unless they come and hear it themselves, or if they hear it on my recordings of it. So
just to make sure we've got all the terms clarified, this work session takes place immediately before the public council meeting.
Right, it precedes every council meeting.
Right, and during this hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, depending on how much business there is to discuss, the council hashes out decisions that are going to be made or voted on in the meeting. And the problem with all of this, of course, is that if you go to the regular meeting thinking that you're going to get some information about how the city is conducting business, you won't find it there.
Right.
There it's just aye and nay. The real information is in the work session meeting, so it's very telling that they don't want that broadcast on Channel 180, or they don't, and they used to allow people to, used to allow people to speak in the regular meeting itself.
The council session, that's right.
But then when that got to the point where people were saying things that the council didn't want to hear and didn't want made public, they moved the public forum, the part where the public can contribute their ideas and criticisms. They moved that to the work session, which they now don't allow to be recorded.
To the non-televised work session, right. And the reason is they don't want the public to hear what the public has to say.
Right.
Mostly what I have to say.
Mostly what
probably secondly what you have to say, but including other people.
Including other people. In fact, depending on what the issues in the city are, when there's a city move to annex a certain part of the outlying area, that's when people come out and say, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this, and this is why. What sewer and water issues, street maintenance and repair issues. That room can fill up with folks who have a vested interest in what the city's trying to decide to do.
Well, a good example would be the proposed Roach development. There were probably more people there than have attended the work session in a long time. Yeah. And it was because the public that lives in that area, and some that don't live in that area, didn't want the fourplexes to be built out there because it didn't fit with the rest of the homes that are built out there. The area is zoned R1C, which allows for single or double homes, and a fourplex is totally different than that. A fourplex is like a small mini mall.
Yeah.
It doesn't look anything like a home, really. Yeah. It looks like a big, long apartment complex or like a mini mall strip.
Yeah.
So anyway, Lois Machi and two people preceded her speaking about Hurley Hall. Then she spoke, and when she went up the microphone, she was terribly hoarse. She had laryngitis, and she couldn't speak, and she walked up to the podium, she asked them, could she have a microphone, because it was the only way she'd be able to speak. And they said, no, you can't do it. It's not on. And then she said, I have to have one. And Jeremy Handler rudely said to her, well, didn't stop you last time speaking up, but her voice wasn't hoarse the last time she came.
In any case.
And she was treated
What an
rudely.
ugly thing to do. I mean, she was treated very, very.
Well,
very
and we have city-owned equipment. The public has paid for this equipment, and then they don't even turn it on.
Yeah.
How
So they-
stupid
yeah,
is that?
nobody
I
gets
mean,
to use it.
it's embarrassing.
It is.
So I spoke up. When Lois wasn't able to speak, she said, why can't I have a microphone or something to that effect? And I said, good question, Lois.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see this on the work session of the 16th November, and that's on my blog. You can witness the whole thing, how she was treated rudely and how they treated me rudely when I spoke up for her.
And it's the only place you can see it.
Right. Okay, so then I called the morning afterwards to let the listeners know two things. Number one, I started this conversation with Steve Van Slooten and Mark Fighton on the air, telling them about my request that I had sent via email to Ben Olson and to Greg Zilka to have my seasonal display on city property as the Lindbergh Lions had been allowed to last year. Because I said if the Lindbergh Lions can have a seasonal display on city property, so can another. And that's what preceded this conversation, this little blip here. I'm gonna, I actually have it recorded, but I don't wanna play the whole thing because I don't wanna encroach on any rights that the radio station might have, but this is for educational purposes, and I'm doing this under the Fair Use Act as an educational attempt to let people know that some of what's being said on KLTF is not factual. At least that's my opinion. And I'll let you decide after hearing what Mark Fighton's response was to me. So here is what I said after I alerted the members of the public to my request about my request to have a seasonal display. Quote, I also want to alert the listeners to the fact that Lois Machi last night was denied, at least temporarily, until she insisted, and I spoke up for her as well, at a city council official work session to speak at the podium with the podium microphone on. Not only do they not broadcast the work sessions publicly, they don't want the public in the audience to be able to hear what the speakers during the public forum are saying to them. What a disgrace to the city, and I stated so, and I stated so. And then I inserted the part, I said it's on my blogspot.com, and I gave the address of that over the air. And evidently the owner of the radio station didn't like that, and I got an email stating that I would be charged $25
For
a 1 minute
advertising.
advertising if I did that again. And yet my blog is not a commercial blog.
Yeah.
It's just colorful commentary and local news.
Mm-hmm.
I gain no economic sustenance from my blog whatsoever. So then this is quote unquote for me again, even though our manager of our public television station requested of the city, could he film those work sessions and put them on, they have denied him. Why? What are they so afraid of? Why do they have to operate in the dark? And that's when Mark Fighton interrupts me and says, because sometimes there is information that's discussed at a work session that isn't necessarily available. It shouldn't be available for public consumption.
Then it shouldn't be an open meeting. And if it were not, we would have issues with that.
Right.
But it is an open meeting. You can't have an open meeting, call it that, and then say, but don't come because we don't want you to know what we're doing.
Right, exactly. So then I said, quote, that can't be true. That can't possibly be true because work sessions are open to the public. Then Mark Fighton says, quote, well, don't tell me it can't be true because I know. I've been in the work sessions where people, discuss personal information about employees and things like that, unquote. And I say, no, they can't. Then Mark Fighton says, that should not be for public consumption. And I said, quote, what you just stated is not true. Now, I am concerned, have been for a long time, because if you go and fact check what's said on KLTF upfront program, first of all, they don't ever cite their sources or rarely cite their sources.
Right.
Okay? And they put up only on their website things that they want to, including they wanted people in that time frame, the same meeting that I was talking at, or the day that I was discussing this with them, that they wanted people to be able to view a video on refugees from Syria. And they stated earlier in the program that they were going to put that up on their website. So that's interesting. Now I'm going to switch, and I just want to clarify it clearly so people understand. The reason I talked about this today is to educate people to not everything you're hearing on KLTF radio may be accurate. People should do their own fact checking. I personally have witnessed a lot of things that they say that just are not accurate. And that's my opinion. Then I also want to talk about, on that program, they advertise. And they advertise for a lot of local businesses. And I put up a blog. It's titled, Justin Beganic Refuses Food Service to Taco Bell Construction Workers. You can see this on my blog. Okay? The reason I have that on my blog is because it reads, I'm looking at a police report dated 5/10/2014. Civil matter property line. Summary. Police were dispatched to the location for property dispute. Upon arrival, contact was made with the Taco Bell construction crew. They indicated the owner of Taco John's came out of the business yelling at them, using profanity, instructing them to get off his property. Now this is from the police report, folks, right here in town. The workers said that they were standing about 1 foot to 2 feet onto the blacktop. I spoke to the Taco John's owner, who is Justin Beganic. That's me saying that in there, that's not right here. But it's stated later on down here. And he admitted to confronting workers. He indicated that he did not want anyone associated with the construction of Taco Bell on his property. He said that they were not allowed to eat at his restaurant as well. The information was noted and the workers were advised. Police were then clear. Involvement, complainant name, Beganic Justin Anthony, age 35. Why this matters? Because the construction workers' civil rights may have been violated. In speaking in a very learned attorney on constitutional rights, he stated that their civil rights were very likely violated. Now, why is this important? Why am I bringing that up now? Because KLTF radio has an advertisement playing, advertising for Taco John's, saying that it's the only locally owned restaurant on Lemire Street in Little Falls. Well, it may be the only restaurant on Lemire Street where the owner, Justin Beganic, refused food service to some people. That matters.
That does matter very much. Well, if nothing else, it's just so uncivil. It's so rude. You know, you're working for the competition, so get off my property, and you know, what a kind of nasty frame of mind that is. And I don't mind saying so. Well, because we've just lost our ability to be polite.
Well, or follow the law.
Yeah.
You know, laws are important. People have civil rights.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you believe they have civil rights or not. If you're going to own a business and you're going to say that the business is open for public food service, and then you're going to say, no, some can't come in, that's reminiscent of before the Civil Rights Act.
Really, that's Jim Crow.
Right.
Yeah.
And Justin Beganic was a mayoral appointee to the Planning and Zoning Commission and was on there for a number of months, if not years. And there's a whole bunch we could go on and on about Justin Beganic and the things that he's put up on Facebook, which led to the whole incident with me posting things on my van, and that's a separate whole topic. And I'm not prepared to go into all of that today because I didn't bring the information, but we should really talk about that and the what led up to the public apology of Jim Hilmerson to me, because it involves Justin Beganic's Facebook post that was indeed, in my opinion, and some attorneys that I know, a very defamatory comment. But we'll save that for another show. Stay tuned, folks. We will get into that.
That'll be interesting.
Now I'm going to switch topics again and go to this business of the refugees and Syria and everything that's happening. And as we get into that, I want to read something that my former attorney, Bruce Fine, wrote. It's titled, Developing a Special Report on the Paris Terror Attacks. And this is what it looks like, so you know that you've got the right article. It's also on my blog.
By the way, I've been remiss, I have not given the date today. It's November 25th, isn't it, 2015?
Yes.
I should have said that at the top of the show, and I'm sorry, because we go through issues. Some of them are just right up to the minute, some of them go back a ways, and it's helpful, I'm sure, to the viewers to know what date we're talking about these things.
Right. I'm not going to read the entire article because it's too long, but this is Bruce Fine's The Liberty Perspective, and it's titled, Rand Paul is Right, Neocons Created ISIS. With the predictability of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, power vacuums in primitive political cultures give birth to extremists, religious or otherwise. There are no exceptions. Israel gave birth to Hamas by crippling the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat's domination Fatah faction. Hezbollah emerged from a power vacuum in Lebanon. Al-Qaeda and Taliban were created by a power vacuum in Afghanistan following the ouster of Soviet troops in 1989. Iran's radical Shiite regime is the offspring of the power vacuum created by the 1979 overthrow of the Shah. Despite the obvious, Mr. Paul's deluded Republican opponents bugled for the overthrow of Iraq, secular President Saddam Hussein, in 2000, heedless of the power vacuum that would ensue. Saddam was a fierce antagonist of Iran's ruling mullahs, against whom he had warred with the United States support for 8 years, 1980 to 1988. No-fly zones and sanctions had crippled Saddam's capacity to threaten the United States, but the neocons insisted on an invasion and the obliteration of Saddam and the ruling Ba'ath Party to save the world from imaginary weapons of mass destruction and to erect a model democracy for the region. After Saddam's ouster and death, Iraq predictably became convulsed by internecine warfare and strife between Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds, featuring an unstable and extremist sectarian central government allied with Iran. A splinter group of Al-Qaeda, which itself was armed and trained by the United States to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, ISIS was born by a United States-generated power vacuum in Iraq. ISIS also took root and grew from a complementary power vacuum in Syria, which neocons fortified by urging the overthrow of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and training Sunni rebels. Undeterred by their predictable multi-trillion-dollar debacle in Iraq, Mr. Paul's neocon detractors idiotically championed war against Libya's secular Muammar Gaddafi after he had abandoned weapons of mass destruction and support for international terrorism. The neocons supported Islamic radicals in the overthrow and murder Gaddafi, which was followed by the plunder of his vast conventional arsenal by Islamic radicals. A power vacuum predictably followed, which ISIS exploited to gain a menacing toehold in Libya. Neocons then placed their staggering stupidity on steroids. They recklessly armed cowardly and inept opponents of ISIS, knowing that the weapons would be captured or sold to the enemy. A second edition of the arms we supplied South Vietnam, which quickly found their way to the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese. Emblematic is a June 5th, 2015 report in Business Insider corroborating that U.S. Humvees captured by ISIS from the Iraqi army have been used in waves of suicide bombing across both. Neocons also created a fetching calling card for ISIS recruitment. They vastly inflated its military capabilities and danger to the United States and the region. That image of omnipotence predictably excited impressionable youth to join because of the neocon engendered perception that ISIS was the New York Yankees of international terrorism. ISIS ranks swell each time a Republican neocon hyperventilates. And the reason I wanted to read that is because, to me, it's stated very well and it lays out exactly how ISIS is created. It's difficult to follow for some people, even myself, but that really tells it like it is, how it was created.
Absolutely. I mean, if you keep poking somebody in the face with a stick, eventually they're going to get upset about it. And every time as I was saying a year ago, every time we drop a bomb, we recruit for ISIS.
Right. And some really stellar people are speaking out, have been speaking out for more than a decade, decades long. Colleen Rowley, one of them, and our friend also Todd Pierce,
right.
That what's happening with our government and our military is not correct and it's not legal.
It's not smart. But
right.
then smart seems to be something that nobody
understands. The lead into this, the reason I'm bringing it up now is because KLTF Radio, Steve Van Sluten and Mark Fighton and Corey Fink have been continuing to talk about the Syrian refugee crisis and a number of issues related to ISIS for a long time now, and the facts are not getting out to the people correctly as to how it was created. And by the way, I want to state that neocons includes a lot within the Democratic Party as well. They're not just Republicans.
Right.
Now, Montel Williams said something profound in the last few days here. This is dated November 23rd, 2015. Montel Williams promises to take up arms against the government if ID cards are forced on Muslims. His tweet actually stated, "If the government ever makes Muslims carry ID cards or shuts down mosques, I will have no choice but to take up arms against my government." That's a pretty profound statement.
That's a very profound
but
statement.
He obviously feels compelled to say that because he feels that our government has no business even talking about restricting of Syrian refugees coming in or monitoring them in any kind of a closed fashion.
Or vetting them and saying, you can come in, you can't.
Right.
It's crazy. Montel Williams is a really smart guy, and I do not think he would say anything that precipitous if he wasn't prepared to back it up. He may have been angry when he said it. Taking up arms against the government is something that nobody does lightly in any case. But obviously, he's very concerned about this.
And the stuff that's being said on KLTF radio every morning, Monday through Friday, about this whole issue with ISIS and the Syrian refugees, and even local refugees possibly coming here, is just astounding. It's sickening. I want to vomit when I hear some of the things, including a female on that call. A caller in said that the Syrian refugees or any refugees coming in, couldn't they be taken to Guantanamo?
Oh my God.
And put in Guantanamo.
Do we still have the land where we interned the Japanese Americans during World War II? Maybe we can just start all that up again.
Well, we have even more.
Live in our concentration camp. We need to try to see some of this from the point of view of the Syrian refugees. They themselves are non-combatants. They have suffered under ISIS. They're leaving Syria to save their lives and the lives of their children. And they probably don't want to live in America forever. They just need someplace to be while it's too dangerous to be at home.
Right. Now, a friend sent this article, and it's really poignant right about now. And I'm going to let Theresa read this. This is written by Jim Wallace, who is, of course, a Lutheran, and he's a very good writer. And just read the highlighted part there.
All right. If we count up the number of people killed or wounded in the ISIS Paris slaughter last weekend and add all their families and friends, the level of human mourning is staggering. Then include the many victims murdered in Beirut just days before, or the legions of those raped and killed in Iraq, Syria, Tunisia, Yemen, Libya, Egypt, and Turkey, who never received the same attention as Western victims, and we see human devastation that is utterly evil. From a religious perspective, the hardest thing about confronting evil is the painful human tendency to only see it in others, in our enemies, and not see any on our side, because of the blurred vision caused by the planks in our own eyes. to paraphrase the Gospels. In discussing ISIS, we should clearly use the language of sin, the enormous sin of the ideological hate of ISIS, finding its victims all over the world. But theologically, sin begets sin, so we cannot simply name sins of ISIS ad nauseum without also lamenting the sins of the West that they use as inexcusable justifications for horrific violence. Overcoming the growing terrorism we face requires addressing the grievances rather than repeating our missteps and mistakes. Is that it?
There's actually a little more, and by the way, Jim Wallace is, I think, the founder of Sojourners, a Lutheran organization.
Otherwise, let's see, we will fail to fall into that, nope, I'm sorry. We will fall into that trap again. Military victories have come quickly, but they don't eliminate a growing ideology. Our invasions have actually exacerbated the instability and sectarian conflict that have helped lead to ISIS, as they gain more recruits for terror locally and now internationally, including, of course, some Americans and Minnesotans. Temporary military victories in Iraq and Syria will not destroy or eliminate the continuing terrorism in the Middle East or in the West. Pope Francis has said that the use of force to protect innocents from terrible aggression is justifiable as a last resort, but wars keep making everything worse with terrible consequences for many other innocents, as he said in 2014. And finally...
That's what he said in 2014.
Excuse me. In these cases, this is Pope Francis. In these cases where there is an unjust aggression, I can only say that it is licit to stop the unjust aggressor. I underscore the verb stop. I am not saying bomb or make war, just stop. And the means that can be used to stop them must be evaluated. One nation alone cannot judge how you stop this, how you stop an unjust aggression.
And I think that was the end of it, and we're about out of time. There's a little bit more here that he said, actually, protecting millions of vulnerable and displaced people. Oh no, this is just more of the article. Protecting millions of vulnerable and displaced people must be our urgent concern. Destroying the growing social media success of ISIS should also be a top priority, as should eliminating the resources and funding for terror, even if that leads us to our oil allies and banks. We must form a clear, direct, and unified global coalition with the authorization of the United Nations Security Council, NATO, the Arab League, and the international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF to unify a strategy of comprehensive economic sanctions and isolation against ISIS. We should also include sanctions against any nations or funders that support ISIS, which would signal how serious we really are. The full diplomatic power of the world's nations should be focused with a unified and strategic use of force to protect the most vulnerable, all against ISIS. And with that, we're out of time.
Yes, we are. And we didn't even get a third of the way through her stack.
Oh,
so.
But we have another show we're filming here, so stay tuned for our next episode, which is going to start with U.S. military prepares drastic escalation of the global drone program. New reporting reveals plans to expand the drone program by 50%.
Oh my God.
They're going to double it.
Crazy.
So that's the start of our next show.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, and this is Can We Talk for November 25th, 2015. Thank you so much for joining us, and please come back. We'll see you soon.